Well, it's really great to be here. Good morning, everyone. Actually, it's brilliant to be following on from Todd, because a number of things that he says I'll be picking up on in my presentation later today. As you can see, I'm on Twitter. I see a few of you tweeting, so if any of you want to send any tweets or comments, do feel free to do so. So the purpose of this presentation really is to look at what really motivates millennials and how does this shape their perception of you guys as employers and your employer kind of brands when they're deciding which company to go and work for. Can I quickly just get a show of hands? How many of you would say you work for startups here? A few of you, actually more than I thought. Great. Well, what I wanted to do was actually take some of the hiring practices and principles that we're seeing in startups and fast-growing businesses to kind of show you how you, and actually could provoke some kind of thought around how you can maybe use some of these practices in your own larger companies potentially. But just to give you a bit of a background into what I do and internships. So we're a platform that has been designed to predominantly help startups and fast-growing businesses recruit talent. So we work with over 6,000 companies in helping them find interns and graduates, and in all range of industries. We actually work with now over 40,000 kind of candidates, and here are just some of the companies that we've worked with. Some of them are also larger. So aside from working with startups, we also work with corporations like Telefonica, Havas and Santander to create unique talent programs aside from their traditional graduate recruitment programs. And but what I wanted to talk to you today really was what we're seeing in terms of some of the recruitment practices some of these companies are using and how you can be using them in your own to attract Gen Y. So when thinking about this issue, there's a leading author, Dan Pink. How many of you have seen his TED Talk? Many of you seen Dan Pink's TED? Actually, I thoroughly recommend seeing his TED Talk. Look him up. He's an author of a book called Drive, and it talks about the role of motivation and the importance of intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic motivation. So just by paying someone more money or using some kind of stick approach to making them do something is not going to get particularly Gen Y to actually do what you want them to do. What he says is that it boils down to three main things. It boils down to giving them a sense of autonomy, a sense of mastery, and a sense of purpose. And I'm going to go through each one of these to kind of explain to you a bit more about how these could work in your own businesses. Before we do that, Alan asked, so what is Gen Y? And Gen Y, there isn't really a definition. I think I'd be stretching it to say, Alan, that you technically fit in Gen Y, but I think people would generally see Gen Y as being people born within from 1980 to 2000. That's the typical kind of definition. If you think about some of their characteristics, they're very values-driven people, very socially minded. We're also seeing a rise in a lot of these young people setting up their own businesses, in particular social enterprises, that look at how they can make a positive difference in society. There's a strong sense of personal brand, and there's very much Generation Me, with everyone having their own Twitter pages, Facebook profiles, and social media. Very much is about themselves. They're also highly connected, and they're also a generation that looks for instant gratification. They are on-demand learners. If they want something, they've got their phone in their pocket, they can take it out and look up whatever it is that they need to do. They live in a world that is open-sourced, that is all about sharing and collaborative consumption. So in terms of the startup world, a number of the fast-growing businesses such as Airbnb or Zipcar, these are some of the examples of companies that are taking these principles of the sharing economy and collaborative consumption and really doing well. And the concept of paying it forward, so rather than just giving back when you've made it in the world, the Gen Y is really about making a difference as you go along and actually supporting people to progress along with yourself. So picking up on number one of Dan Pink's three kind of tenets of intrinsic motivation, he talks about autonomy. And so autonomy, the main part of giving people a sense of autonomy is trust. And if we look at some of the examples of where this is working pretty well in the startup or the kind of venture capital-backed startup world in the US, there's a payments company, it's a US company, but it's now launched in the UK called Stripe. And they have and I give a health warning, by the way, some of these things might terrify many of you in the room. They have a total email transparency policy, so everyone can see everyone else's email. And this might seem really bizarre, and it did to me, but I know a couple of people that work there. And what it does is that it's a very kind of open culture, a culture where everyone can see what everyone else is doing, and there's a high degree of kind of trust. It also fosters more awareness and understanding between colleagues about what each other are actually doing in the workplace. Then we've got companies, larger companies like Evernote, Netflix, and Twitter. Again, these are US companies that have an unlimited vacation policy. Their policy is there isn't really a 20 days plus bank holiday kind of policy as there is in the UK. It's up to you. And again, it comes back to trust, because what they know is that if we say it's up to you to take as much holiday as you want, what they actually find is people take less than the 20 days or 25 days or whatever they would have done, because they can. And actually, they love being at work so much. It might sound a bit bizarre and strange, but they don't want to take their vacation. They also feel like they'll be letting their colleagues down. Then there's a third kind of example, and I really encourage you to look it up. They actually put their employee handbook online, and it's quite a hefty document, but it's a really interesting read. It's called Valve. It's a gaming company. It's about $3 billion company. And they truly have a flat structure. No bosses. You literally wheel around your table and your chair. You go sit next to someone you want to sit next to. When you're bored with them, you go and sit next to someone else. And you basically do what you want. And there have been critics. I mean, that company's a pretty big company now, but there have been critics that say that there are people that have more kind of say of others. But I really encourage you to look at it to see what you can potentially take from the practices of Valve in your own business. And I should have said at the beginning, I'm going to try and go over these quite quickly just to leave enough time at the end for questions, because I don't want Alan to jump up and kick me off the stage. So I'm going to move on to mastery. So mastery is a really interesting one, particularly, and this is actually a photo from our office. This is just a cupboard, which we've turned into a learning and development wall. And this is a quote from one of our team. He says, "I only want to work with people where I think I could never do what they do, and they think that about me too." And this comes from the realization that actually everyone in your company is an expert in something or another. And we're a young team. There's 15 of us right now, predominantly recent graduates. And when I was thinking about, okay, what can we do? We don't have elaborate HR departments and people looking at talent development, learning and development internally, but actually everyone has been hired and brought there for a reason. They all have a particular skill which they can then share and teach other people. And actually a lot of research has shown that the best way to kind of learn is by actually teaching other people. And so what we've done is we've just done a very simple kind of thing on our cupboard. On one side is I would like to learn about, and you just put up kind of post-its. Someone, I think in our tech team, said manners. And then I can teach people about, and basically this understanding that, look, everyone has something to offer. And think about how you can empower your own employees, in particular around Gen Y, as being seen as kind of masters of their areas of work and actually experts in their own right. And the third one, which is really interesting, is this concept of purpose. And the authors of this book, Tribal Leadership, have studied a whole range of organizations, different sizes, different industries. And what they found is that the kind of core, the kind of essence of what makes a really highly performing organization is something they call a noble cause. And this is where you've got your team members are all aligned in terms of working towards one direction, towards a common purpose, which are aligned also to their own values. And this, again, goes back to what Dan Pink says is a key factor towards invoking intrinsic motivation in your employees. So I've kind of whizzed through the three kind of main facets of what is seen to be the kind of the motivating factors for Generation Y. Now, if we think about what's needed in terms of revising the way we work as recruiters and in the industry, and Todd talked about this actually, his last slide really sums it up, because for 99% of people, they're going to have a negative experience of going through recruitment. They're probably going to be rejected just because of the numbers, they just don't add up. There'll be thousands of people applying for a handful of jobs. And so what we really need to think about is what experience does that leave with that person? And that person might be a future customer, in the case of Snapfish, might be a future experienced hire. But if they have a negative experience of your company, they're probably not going to want to come back to you, even if you want to engage with them in a year or a few years' time. And so what we've been doing is developing a new model of recruitment where we feel embodies these three kind of principles of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and changes the whole recruitment paradigm from being a transaction to being more about learning and development. And again, Todd talked about the need to educate your potential employees rather than just promoting. And what happens in the current climate is that candidates actually just spray and pray with their CVs, hoping that one of them will land, and not really knowing what you do as a company or knowing where their kind of skills and kind of values truly align. And so actually there's a role for you guys as recruiters to really educate the market and actually play a role in pre-training your talent so they know what to expect before coming to you. So what we're doing is working with employers to repackage the learning and development materials that they currently only make available to their existing staff and saying, let's take a subset of those materials and make it available to people before they've even joined you. Why don't you take a role in pre-training the talent? Because about 40% of employers are saying they're struggling to find the people that they need. So why don't you do something about it? Why don't you put your learning materials out there and help people learn for the job that they're going to apply for, gain new skills, and actually realize in the process that actually Deloitte doesn't have to be about tax and audit. They actually are looking for people in technology. So actually, why doesn't Deloitte put material around technology on a platform where actually people that might be looking at a job at Google can discover a job at Deloitte through learning and development? In doing so, you're creating a recruitment model where everybody leaves better off, irrespective of if they get the job or not. So whilst you might hire 1% of the people or less that apply, 99% of the people will leave with new skills, will leave with better insights, and will actually leave as a brand advocate of your company, rather than feeling like a failure or the guy that did with Snapfish, that they never even got back to me. And that they can then go on to get a job somewhere else, or they can maybe come back to you when they're more prepared to come and work for you. And so this really plays to kind of the three aspects of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, where you're giving the candidates the opportunity to discover their ideal career path by themselves, rather than just spraying and praying. They're accessing material, they're learning things, and they're understanding actually where are their skills best suited. They're getting the opportunity to learn and master new skills, which plays to the mastery aspect. And it also gives them the sense of purpose, because once they've found you and they've found your resources and your organization, they really know that they are well suited to your company. So as I said, I whizzed through those presentations. I have very few slides, purposely, because I know this is a new kind of model and it can be quite controversial, but I wanted to really open it up for any questions in the remaining time. I think I have 10 minutes? 2 minutes? 2 minutes, okay, 2 minutes for any questions. Does anyone have any questions for me? Or are you very shy?
In terms of the stuff that you give, L&D stuff that you give to new starters before they join, what kind of material is it?
This is a new product that we're developing. We're really working with the employers to see what they're comfortable with. So some employers can be quite protective over some of the things they develop, but what we're saying is, look, we can repackage it. It could be around anything. It could be if you're a company like SAP and you've got, it could even actually work as it's basically a marketing tool, because if you can train new people in how to use SAP, and then they go and get a job in another company using SAP tools, that's acted as a kind of a marketing tool for SAP as a company. It's giving them a skill which they can apply in another business. But it could be as simple as, it could be coding materials, or it could be financial modeling 101. It could be anything, really. And particularly think about areas that you're struggling to hire, because those are the things you should be sharing. And actually that, I feel, is going to be the employer brand of the future, is employers that are aligned to the kind of the idea of sharing, paying it forward, and not just thinking about protecting everything for themselves and keeping it behind a wall of, this is my resource, I don't want to share it with you. If by putting it out there, you're repositioning yourselves in the mind of the employees, and thinking, actually, I didn't realize there's a role in tech in a company like Deloitte, and actually changing their mindset of you as an employer and the breadth of opportunities that you have. So that question's really up to you as an employer about where do you want to be seen as a thought leader, or as an area where opportunities exist.
Thank you, Rajeeb. I'm just going to ask you one quick question.
Yeah, sure.
One of the Twitter streams wanted to know, doesn't this all sound a little bit like restrictive practice kind of hiring, because we're only trying to target the millennials?
Not at all. I mean, this has been kind of, this session has been designed to kind of talk about some of the issues around millennials, but the same thing applies to anyone. The whole concept of pre-training talent, sharing your materials could apply to experienced hires or to middle management. So the concepts can be applied. It's just been given the kind of lens of millennials for this particular session.
Great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Robin.